A rainy evening in Portland, the rain hammered against the windshield as Graham Westfield sat in his black Mercedes. Staring blankly at the Portland Medical Center's towering facade, he hated hospitals. The sterile smell, the fluorescent lights, the false hope that hung in every corridor like poisoned air. 5 years had passed since he last set foot in one. The night his world ended in a crash of metal and shattered dreams, Graham had only stopped here because his business partner insisted he sign papers for a medical technology investment. Sign the papers, make millions more, add to the fortune that meant nothing anymore. His driver had dropped him off an hour ago, but he couldn't bring himself to leave the parking lot. The tapping on his window made him jump. The girl in the rain, a young girl, stood outside, drenched to the bone, her dark hair plastered to her face. She couldn't have been more than 16, wearing a thin jacket that did nothing against the October storm. Her eyes held a desperation that cut through Graham's carefully constructed walls. He lowered the window halfway.
"Please,"
the girl said, her voice cracking. "I know this sounds crazy, but I need help. My mom is supposed to see a specialist in 20 minutes, and our car broke down 6 blocks away. The buses aren't running because of the storm, and every rideshare canceled on us. Please, she's really sick." Graham's first instinct was to say no. He had money, not time. Not compassion. Not anymore. But something in the girl's eyes reminded him of someone he'd lost. That same fierce determination mixed with barely concealed terror. "Get in," he heard himself say. Nora struggled. The girl practically fell into the passenger seat, water pooling around her worn sneakers. "Thank you. Thank you so much. I'm Jesse. My mom is Nora. We're just a few blocks away." "I can't believe someone actually stopped." Graham didn't respond, just put the car in drive and followed her directions through the rain-slicked streets. They arrived at a bus stop where a woman sat hunched on the bench, clutching her stomach. Even from a distance, Graham could see she was in pain. Jessie bolted from the car before it fully stopped, helping her mother stand. The woman looked up, and Graham's breath caught. She couldn't have been much older than him, maybe late 40s, but illness had aged her. Dark circles shadowed her eyes, and her skin had that grayish tone he recognized from the cancer ward where his wife had spent her final days. But there was something else, something familiar about her face that he couldn't place. "This nice man is giving us a ride to your appointment," Jessie said. Supporting her mother's weight, Graham got out and opened the back door, helping Jessie settle her mother inside. Nora looked at him directly for the first time, and a flash of recognition crossed her features before she quickly looked away. "Thank you," she whispered. "You didn't have to do this." The drive to Hope as Graham drove back to the hospital, Jessie filled the silence with nervous chatter. "The specialist is Dr. Ramos. She's one of the top oncologists in the Pacific Northwest. We've been on the waiting list for 4 months. Mom has stage 3 pancreatic cancer. The regular treatments haven't worked, but Dr. Ramos has this new experimental protocol." Graham's hands tightened on the steering wheel. Pancreatic cancer. The same thing that took his wife, back when experimental treatments weren't available, when all the money in the world couldn't buy more time. "How long have you been fighting?" he asked Nora through the rearview mirror. "8," she replied softly. "I'm a nurse." "Was a nurse?" "I knew what the symptoms meant when they started, but I didn't have insurance. By the time I got into the free clinic, it had already spread." "She kept working until 3 months ago," Jessie added, pride and pain mixing in her voice. "Double shifts at the nursing home, taking care of everyone else. She never complains, not once." Graham pulled into the hospital's main entrance. "Which floor?" "You've done enough," Nora said, attempting to sound firm despite her weakness. "We can manage from here." "8th floor, oncology wing," Jessie answered simultaneously. "Please, sir. I don't think Mom can make it on her own." Inside the hospital, Graham found himself parking in the emergency physician lot. Using his business partner's credentials to avoid the usual hassles, he helped Jessie support Nora through the lobby, ignoring the curious stares from staff who might have recognized him. At the elevator, Nora nearly collapsed, and Graham caught her, struck by how light she felt, how fragile. "I'm sorry," Nora murmured against his shoulder. "I'm so sorry." The words seemed meant for more than just the inconvenience. Graham met her eyes and saw tears there, along with that recognition again. "Do I know you?" Nora shook her head quickly. "No, just thank you for helping us." But Graham knew she was lying. The elevator doors opened on the 8th floor, and they were immediately swept into the controlled chaos of the oncology department. A nurse directed them to Dr. Ramos's office, where they waited in a small consultation room. Medical certificates covered the walls, along with photos of smiling patients. Survivors who had beaten the odds. Graham told himself he should leave. He'd done his good deed. His driver could pick him up, but Jessie's hand found his, squeezing tight, and he realized she was terrified. "Stay," she whispered. "Please. Just until we know what the doctor says." The diagnosis: Dr. Ramos was a petite woman, with kind eyes and no-nonsense demeanor. She reviewed Nora's files on her tablet, her expression growing more serious with each swipe. "Mrs. Fitzgerald," she began, and Graham filed away the last name. "Your latest scans show the tumor has continued to grow despite the chemotherapy. The traditional treatment options have been exhausted." Jessie's hand clenched tighter around Graham's. Nora sat perfectly still, as if she'd expected this news. "However," Dr. Ramos continued, "you're an excellent candidate for our new immunotherapy trial. The early results have been promising. 23% complete remission, 47% significant tumor reduction. What's the cost?" Nora asked, her voice steady despite everything. Dr. Ramos hesitated. "The trial itself is free, but there are associated costs. Hospital stays, additional medications, monitoring. We estimate around $80,000 for the full treatment course." The number hung in the air like a death sentence. Graham watched Nora's face crumble before she forced it back into composure. Jessie made a small, choked sound beside him. "We have $3,000 saved," Nora said quietly. "I can sell our car, our furniture, maybe take a loan." "Mom, no bank will give us a loan," Jessie said, tears streaming down her face. Dr. Ramos looked genuinely pained. "I wish I could do more. There are some charitable foundations, but the application process takes months. And we need to start treatment within 3 weeks to have the best chance." Graham stood abruptly. All three women looked at him. "I'll cover it." A stranger's gift silence filled the room. "What?" Nora finally managed. "I'll pay for the treatment. All of it. Whatever it costs." Graham pulled out his phone, opening his banking app. "Dr. Ramos, what's the hospital's billing department? I can wire the funds today, sir." "We don't even know your name," Dr. Ramos said, stunned, double quotes Graham Westfield. He saw the recognition dawn on the doctor's face. Everyone in Portland's medical community knew his name. He'd donated millions to various hospitals after his wife died, though he'd done it through his foundation to avoid attention. Nora was shaking her head violently. No, I can't accept this. You don't know us. This is insane." "Mom," Jessie breathed, caught between hope and disbelief. Graham looked at Nora directly. "You said you're a nurse? Were you working at Providence Hospital 12 years ago?" Nora's face went pale. "How did you know?" "Because I remember you now. You were my wife's best friend, Catherine Westfield. You were in nursing school together." The room seemed to tilt. Jessie looked between them, confused. Dr. Ramos quietly excused herself. Sensing the private nature of what was unfolding, "I thought you looked familiar," Graham continued, his voice rough with emotion. "But you disappeared after the accident. Catherine talked about you all the time, about how you two were going to open a community clinic together someday. She called you her sister." Tears poured down Nora's face. "I couldn't face you. I was working the night they brought her in. I was the triage nurse. I should have seen how serious it was faster, should have called for trauma immediately. By the time we got her into surgery, there was too much internal bleeding. Your daughter, Emma, she never had a chance, but Catherine held on for 3 hours. She kept asking for you." The old pain ripped through Graham's chest, but with it came something unexpected. Understanding. "You blame yourself. I failed them." "I failed you." "No." Graham's voice was firm. "The drunk driver who hit them failed us. The universe failed us. But not you. Catherine died holding my hand. She told me she loved me. She told me to live. I haven't done that. Not really, not for 5 years. But maybe this is why our paths crossed today. A second chance. Nora covered her face with her hands, sobbing. Jessie wrapped her arms around her mother, crying too. Graham stood there, feeling something crack open in his chest, where ice had lived for so long. "Let me do this," he said quietly. Not as charity. As what Catherine would have wanted. She'd want her best friend to fight, to live, to see her daughter grow up. "Please." Nora looked up at him, searching his face for something. Whatever she found there made her nod slowly. "Okay, but I'll pay you back. Somehow. Even if it takes the rest of my life," Graham said. Though they both knew it was a lie that made the truth more bearable. Dr. Ramos returned with paperwork. Her professional mask back in place, but her eyes warm. "If we're doing this, we should start admission procedures today. Mrs. Fitzgerald. You'll need to stay overnight for preliminary testing." As the doctor and Jessie stepped out to handle logistics, Graham and Nora sat alone in the consultation room. The rain continued to pour outside the window, washing the city clean. "I stayed away because I couldn't bear to see you suffering," Nora said softly. "Every time I thought about calling, checking on you, I remembered their faces on those gurneys. I was a coward." "You were human," Graham replied. "We both were. We both are. Why are you really doing this?" Graham thought about that question, about the 5 years of isolation, of building higher walls, of convinced himself he was better off alone. "Because I'm tired of being dead while I'm still breathing. Because maybe saving you is how I start saving myself." Nora reached across and took his hand. "Catherine loved you so much. She'd be happy you stopped today. She'd be happy you're going to fight." The path forward as they sat there. Hands clasped, two broken people bound by tragedy and loss. Neither noticed Jessie watching from the doorway. The teenager saw something she hadn't seen in months, hope lighting her mother's eyes. And she saw something in the sad stranger who'd become their unexpected savior. The first spark of life returning to someone who'd been walking through the world like a ghost. Outside, the rain began to let up. Somewhere in the city, a rainbow was probably forming, though none of them could see it yet. But it was there, waiting. A promise that storms eventually pass and light finds its way through even the darkest clouds. The story of Graham, Nora and Jessie was just beginning. Built on tragedy but reaching toward something that might, one day, resemble healing. Secrets in the hospital corridors. 3 days had passed since Graham Westfield walked back into Nora Fitzgerald's life. 3 days of preliminary tests, consultations, and preparation for the immunotherapy treatment that represented her best chance at survival. Graham found himself visiting the hospital every evening after work. A routine that surprised even him. He told himself it was simply to check on the investment, to ensure the money was being used properly. But deep down he knew the truth. For the first time in 5 years, he had a reason to care about something beyond quarterly reports and board meetings. Jessie had become his shadow during these visits. The teenager talked constantly, filling the silences that Graham had grown comfortable with. She told him about her school, her dreams of becoming a veterinarian. The little apartment she and her mother shared in a neighborhood Graham had never visited despite living in Portland his entire life. "Mom worked so hard," Jessie said one evening, as they sat in the hospital cafeteria. "Nora was undergoing another round of tests. After my dad died when I was 7, she took every shift she could get. Double shifts, holidays, weekends. She wanted to make sure I had everything I needed." Graham stirred his coffee absently. "How did your father die?" "Heart attack. He was only One day he was coaching my soccer team. The next day he was gone." Jessie's voice grew quiet. "Mom says I look like him. Same dark hair, same stubborn chin. She's proud of you. I can tell. No. That's why I have to stay strong for her. She spent 16 years being strong for me. Now it's my turn." The maturity in those words struck Graham hard. Jessie was the same age Emma would have been if she'd lived. His daughter would have been planning for college now, falling in love, discovering who she wanted to become. Instead, she remained frozen at 11 years old in his memories. Forever laughing, forever asking him to play one more game before bedtime. The photograph that night. Unable to sleep, Graham found himself in his home office, surrounded by the empire he'd built, but barely noticed anymore. His company, Westfield Technologies, had revolutionized medical imaging software. Ironic, considering how much he'd come to hate hospitals. He opened the bottom drawer of his desk, it's the one he never touched, and pulled out a leather photo album. Catherine smiled up at him from the first page, radiant in her wedding dress. He turned the pages slowly, watching their life unfold in frozen moments. Catherine, graduating from nursing school. Emma's first birthday. Family vacation at the coast. Then he found the photo. It made his breath catch. It was from Catherine's nursing school graduation, 15 years ago. His wife stood center frame, arm around another young woman. Both wore their caps and gowns, both grinning at the camera with their whole lives ahead of them. The other woman was Nora. Graham studied the photo closely. Nora looked so different then, healthy and vibrant, her face full of dreams. Written on the back in Catherine's handwriting, "My sister from another mister, me and Nora against the world. We're going to change healthcare together." Something else caught his attention. In the background of the photo, slightly out of focus, stood a young man in a hospital orderly uniform. He was looking directly at Nora with obvious affection. Graham's phone buzzed. A text from Jessie. "Mom is asking for you. Can you come tomorrow morning instead of evening? She wants to talk to you about something important." Morning revelations. Graham arrived at the hospital at 8 the next morning, surprising himself with how quickly he'd cleared his schedule. His assistant had looked shocked when he told her to cancel his meetings. He hadn't taken a morning off in 5 years. Nora was sitting up in bed looking stronger than she had days ago. The preliminary treatments were already helping, flushing toxins from her system, preparing her body for the real fight ahead. "Thank you for coming," she said as he entered. "Jessie went to school. I wanted to talk to you alone." Graham pulled up a chair. "What's on your mind?" Nora took a deep breath. "I need to tell you the truth about the night Catherine and Emma died. The whole truth, not just what I told you before." His body tensed. "I don't understand. When the ambulance brought them in, Catherine was barely conscious, but she kept saying something. The other nurses couldn't understand her, but I could. She was saying, 'Tell Graham I'm sorry.' Sorry for what? The accident wasn't her fault." Nora's eyes filled with tears. "She was saying sorry because she'd been on her way to see me. You too had been fighting that day. Do you remember? About how much you were working, how you were never home." Graham did remember. It had been a stupid argument about him missing Emma's piano recital. Catherine had been hurt, and he'd been defensive. They'd both said things they didn't mean. "Catherine called me that evening," Nora continued. "She was upset, crying. She said she needed to talk to someone, needed advice about whether she was being unreasonable. I told her to come over, even though it was raining, even though Emma had school the next day. If I'd just told her to stay home to talk it through with you in the morning, she'd still be alive." The weight of guilt. Graham sat back, processing this information. All these years he'd carried his own guilt about that fight, about not being the husband Catherine deserved. He'd never imagined Nora carried the same burden. "Can't think that way," he said finally. "The drunk driver is responsible. Not you, not me, not Catherine. Just him. But I've thought that way for 5 years. Every single day. And when I got sick, part of me thought maybe this was punishment. Maybe this was what I deserved for my role in taking them from you." "No." Graham's voice was firm. "That's not how the universe works. Bad things happen to good people. You were Catherine's best friend. She loved you. She'd be devastated to know you've been carrying this guilt." Nora wiped her tears. "There's more. After the accident, I couldn't work in the ER anymore. Every trauma case, I'd see Catherine's face. I transferred to a nursing home. Lower pay, less demanding. That's when I started struggling financially. Lost my health insurance. Couldn't afford preventive care. By the time I noticed the symptoms, the cancer had already spread." Graham understood now. The chain of events that led from tragedy to illness, from loss to poverty. How one terrible night could ripple forward, destroying futures years later. I tried to reach out to you once, Nora said. About 2 years after the accident, I went to your house, but when I got to the door, I saw you through the window. You looked so broken, so lost. I couldn't bring myself to ring the doorbell. What would I say? How could I face you? So you disappeared. I convinced myself it was for the best, that you were better off not having reminders of that night. But I thought about you all the time, wondered how you were coping, prayed you'd found some peace. Graham's truth. Graham stood and walked to the window, looking out at the city below. You want to know how I coped? I didn't. I buried myself in work. Built my company into something Catherine would have been proud of, except I did it for all the wrong reasons. Not to honor her memory, but to avoid thinking about her. To avoid feeling anything at all. He turned back to Nora. Stopped seeing friends. Stopped going to places we'd been together. Sold our house and moved into a sterile penthouse that had no memories. I became successful and miserable and convinced myself that was all I deserved. We've both been punishing ourselves, Nora said softly. Yes, and it has to stop. For both of us, Nora nodded. When I saw you in that car, when Jessie asked for help, I almost told her to find someone else, because I recognized you immediately. 5 years older, harder around the edges, but still you. And I thought, I can't let him see what I've become. I can't let him see how far I've fallen, but you did, because Jessie needed help. Because being a mother means swallowing your pride. And now, here we are, 2 ghosts trying to figure out how to be alive again. Jessie's investigation, what neither Graham nor Nora knew, was that Jessie had been doing some investigating of her own. She'd Googled Graham Westfield after that first day, and what she'd found had shocked her. Not just his wealth, though that was staggering. Not just his success, though his company's innovations had saved countless lives. It was the photos from before. Graham with his wife and daughter. The happy family they'd been. And then the news articles about the accident. The tragedy that had broken him. Jessie had also found something else. Records of massive charitable donations to hospitals, women's shelters, children's foundations, all anonymous, all made through the Westfield Foundation, all starting right after his family died. Graham Westfield wasn't just rich. He was a man who'd tried to heal the world because he couldn't heal himself. She'd shown her mother none of this, sensing that Nora needed to find her own way through whatever complicated history existed between them. But Jessie understood now why Graham had stopped that rainy evening, why he'd agreed to help, why he kept visiting. He wasn't just saving her mother. He was trying to save himself. The treatment begins, Dr. Ramos started Nora on the immunotherapy protocol the following Monday. The treatment involved genetically modified immune cells that would target and attack the cancer cells specifically. It was cutting-edge science, kind of medicine that hadn't existed when Catherine was sick. Graham found himself learning everything he could about the treatment. He read medical journals, consulted with experts his company worked with, even attended a support group for families of cancer patients. The other attendees seemed surprised to see a man in a $3,000 suit sitting among them, but they welcomed him anyway. He started visiting Nora every day, sometimes twice a day. They'd talk about Catherine, sharing memories that were painful but necessary. Graham learned things about his wife he'd never known. How she'd once dreamed of joining Doctors Without Borders. How she'd secretly taken singing lessons because she'd been too embarrassed to sing in front of him. How she'd told Nora the day before she died that Graham was the love of her life. Even when they fought, Nora told him about her own marriage. About Jessie's father, David. How they'd met at a hospital fundraiser. How he'd been a firefighter, brave and kind and devoted to his family. How his sudden death had shattered her world, but made her stronger out of necessity. We've both loved deeply and lost everything, Nora said one afternoon. Maybe that's why fate brought us back together. Maybe we're supposed to help each other remember that love is worth the risk even when you know it can hurt you. The foundation of trust. 6 weeks into treatment, the first scans showed promising results. The tumor had shrunk by 18%. Dr. Ramos was cautiously optimistic. Nora cried when she heard the news, and Graham found himself crying too. Something he hadn't done since the funeral. Jessie threw her arms around both of them. creating an impromptu group hug right there in the doctor's office. For a moment, they were just three people who'd found each other in the darkness. Celebrating a glimpse of light, Graham made a decision that night. He called his lawyer and had him draw up papers establishing a new charitable foundation specifically for cancer patients. He named it the Catherine and Emma Westfield Memorial Foundation. With Nora listed as the future director, pending her recovery, when he told her about it the next day, Nora was speechless. "You're going to get better," Graham said. "And when you do, you're going to help other people the way I helped you. You're going to honor Catherine's dream of changing healthcare. You're going to make sure no one else has to choose between treatment and bankruptcy." Graham, I don't know what to say. Say you'll fight. Say you'll survive. Say you'll let me be part of your life, whatever that looks like. Nora reached out and took his hand. "I'll fight. For Jesse, for Catherine's memory, and for you. Because you deserve to see good things happen again." Building something new as autumn turned to winter, a new routine emerged. Graham would pick up Jessie from school twice a week, giving them time to bond. He helped her with her math homework, shared stories about Emma, listened to her teenager problems with a patience that surprised them both. On weekends, when Nora had the energy, the three of them would have dinner together. Sometimes at the hospital cafeteria, sometimes at Graham's penthouse, which slowly started accumulating signs of life. A throw blanket Nora had knitted, Jessie's school photos on the refrigerator, laughter echoing through rooms that had been silent for 5 years. They weren't a traditional family. They were something else entirely. Something built from tragedy and held together by hope. Something fragile, but growing stronger every day. Nora's treatment continued to show progress. By week 12, the tumor had shrunk by 34%. Dr. Ramos started using words like remission and long-term survival. Words that felt like prayers being answered. The confession one evening. As they sat in Nora's hospital room watching the sun set over Portland, Graham finally said what had been building in his heart for months. "I need to tell you something. And I need you to just listen without responding right away." Nora set down the book she'd been reading. "Okay. When Catherine died, I thought I'd never feel anything again. I thought that part of me died with her and Emma. I spent 5 years proving myself right. It's cutting off every emotion, every connection, every chance at happiness. And then a teenage girl knocked on my car window in the rain and everything changed." He paused, gathering courage. "You've become important to me, Nora. Both you and Jessie. I know this started because of Catherine, because of our shared past. But it's become something more. I wake up thinking about whether you had a good night. I check my phone constantly for updates from the nurses. I plan my days around visiting hours." Nora started to speak, but Graham held up his hand. "Not saying this to pressure you or to make you uncomfortable. I know you're fighting for your life right now. I know you have more important things to worry about than the feelings of a man you barely knew before 3 months ago. But I needed you to know that you matter to me, that Jessie matters to me, that for the first time since I lost my family, I can imagine a future that doesn't feel empty." Tears streamed down Nora's face. "Can I respond now?" Graham nodded, suddenly terrified of what she might say. "You matter to me too," Nora said softly. "You and Jessie are my whole world, but you've become part of that world in a way I never expected. You make me want to fight harder. You make me believe that even if I survive this cancer, there's something worth surviving for beyond just being Jessie's mom." She reached for his hand. "I'm scared, Graham. I'm scared of dying, yes. But I'm also scared of living. Of letting myself hope for things I thought I'd never have again. Of risking my heart when my body is already so broken." "I'm scared too," Graham admitted. "Terrified. But I think Catherine would tell us that being scared isn't a reason to stop. It's a reason to be brave." They sat in silence, hands clasped. Two wounded souls acknowledging the feelings neither had planned on developing. Jessie's blessing outside the room. Jessie stood with her back against the wall, having heard everything. She'd been coming to bring her mother's favorite tea when she'd paused at the door. Instinctively knowing she was about to overhear something private, she should have felt conflicted. Her father had only been gone 9 years. Some part of her should have resented Graham for taking a place in their lives. for making her mother smile in ways Jessie hadn't seen since before the cancer diagnosis. But she didn't resent him. She was grateful. Graham had given them more than money for treatment. He'd given them hope. He'd given Jessie her mother back in ways that had nothing to do with medicine. He'd shown her that tragedy doesn't have to be the end of the story, that broken people can heal each other if they're brave enough to try. She wiped her own tears and walked into the room, pretending she'd just arrived. "Hey, what's going on? Why is everyone crying?" Nora and Graham quickly composed themselves, but Jessie wasn't fooled. "We're just having a moment," Nora said. "Good tears, not bad tears." Jessie set down the tea and looked at both of them seriously. "Can I say something?" "Of course, honey. I know what's happening here. I'm 16, not stupid, and I just want you both to know that I think it's okay. Actually, I think it's more than okay. I think it's exactly what all three of us need." Nora's eyes widened. "Jessie, I don't know what you think, Mom. Stop. I see the way you look at him. I see the way he looks at you. I see how he looks at me, like I'm someone who matters, like I'm worth his time. Dad would want you to be happy. He'd want us both to have someone who cares about us the way Graham does." Graham felt his throat tighten. "Jessie, your mother and I know you haven't figured out exactly what this is yet. But whatever it becomes, you have my blessing. Both of you. Because life is too short and too hard to push away the people who make it better." The promise of tomorrow that night. After Jessie had gone home to do homework and Nora had fallen asleep, Graham sat alone in the hospital room, watching her breathe. The monitors beeped softly, tracking a life that was fighting to continue. He thought about Catherine, about how she'd want him to be happy. He thought about Emma, who'd loved everyone she met with uncomplicated joy. He thought about the 5 years he'd wasted being dead while still breathing. And he made a promise to himself. To his lost family and to the new family forming around him, he would stop hiding. He would stop punishing himself. He would live fully, love bravely, and trust that the people we lose would want us to find happiness again. Nora stirred and opened her eyes, finding Graham still there. "You should go home. Get some rest." "In a minute," he said. "I'm exactly where I need to be." She smiled and closed her eyes again. And Graham realized something profound. Healing doesn't mean forgetting the people we've lost. It means honoring them by finding the courage to keep living, to keep loving, to keep believing that tomorrow might bring something beautiful, the turning. Point Spring arrived in Portland with an explosion of cherry blossoms and longer days. For Nora Fitzgerald. It arrived with the words she'd been praying to hear for 6 months. Complete remission. Dr. Ramos delivered the news on a Tuesday morning, with Graham and Jessie crowded into the small examination room. The scans showed no active cancer cells. The immunotherapy had worked beyond anyone's expectations. Nora's body had responded to treatment like a medical miracle, defying the statistics that said pancreatic cancer was nearly always fatal. Jessie burst into tears, grabbing her mother in a hug so tight that Nora gasped. Graham stood frozen, overwhelmed by emotions he couldn't name. Relief, joy, gratitude, and something deeper. Something that felt like a door opening to a future he'd stopped believing in. "We'll need to do regular monitoring," Dr. Ramos cautioned, even as she smiled. "Every 3 months for the first year, then every 6 months. Cancer can be tricky, and we want to catch any recurrence early. But Nora, you've beaten this. You've actually beaten this." Nora couldn't speak. She could only cry and hold her daughter and look at Graham with eyes that said everything her voice couldn't. Coming home 2 weeks later, after final tests and clearances, Nora was officially discharged from ongoing treatment. She'd still need checkups, still need to be careful, but she could resume a normal life. Whatever normal meant now. Graham had been busy during those 2 weeks. Without telling Nora, he'd worked with Jessie to transform their apartment. New furniture replaced the second-hand pieces. The walls had been painted soft, warm colors. The kitchen had been fully stocked. Jessie's room now had a desk for studying, bookshelves for her growing collection, and a window seat she'd always wanted. But the biggest change was in Nora's room. Graham had hired an interior designer to to create a space that felt like a sanctuary. Soft bedding, blackout curtains for restful sleep, a reading chair by the window, photographs of Jesse throughout the years covering one wall. When Nora walked in and saw what they'd done, she sat on her new bed and cried for 20 minutes straight. "You didn't have to do all this," she said when she could finally speak. "Yes, I did," Graham replied simply. "You deserve to come home to something beautiful. You deserve to rest in comfort. You deserve everything good." Jessie sat beside her mother, beaming with pride at keeping the secret. "Do you like it, Mom?" "Really like it. I love it. I love all of it. I love you both so much. It's the foundation's first steps, say month into remission." Nora felt strong enough to start working on the Catherine and Emma Westfield Memorial Foundation. Graham had set everything up legally and financially, but he wanted Nora to shape its mission and direction. They met in Graham's office, which Nora had visited dozens of times, but never in a professional capacity. Now she sat across from him at the conference table, reviewing proposals and budgets, feeling like herself again. Not just a mother, not just a survivor, but a woman with purpose and skills and something to contribute. "I think we should focus on 3 areas," Nora explained, pointing to the presentation she'd prepared. "First, direct financial assistance for experimental treatments, like what you did for me. Second, support services for families, because treating cancer isn't just about the patient. And third, research funding for immunotherapy and other emerging treatments." Graham listened intently, impressed by how thoroughly she'd thought this through. "How much are you thinking for the first-year budget?" $5 million, Nora said, then quickly added, "I know that's a lot, but if we're going to make a real difference, let's make it 10 million, Graham interrupted. "Why start small?" Nora stared at him. "Graham, that's an enormous amount of money." "I have an enormous amount of money. And Catherine would love knowing it's being used this way. Emma, too. She was always giving away her allowance to homeless people we'd pass on the street." The mention of his daughter made Nora's heart ache. She'd never met Emma, only heard Catherine's stories about her. But she felt connected to the little girl who'd been taken too soon. "Okay," Nora agreed. 10 million. We're going to change lives with this." "You already changed mine," Graham said quietly. Jessie's graduation as spring turned to summer. Jessie prepared for her high school graduation. Against all odds, despite the chaos of the past year, she'd maintained her grades and earned a scholarship to Portland State University. She wanted to study veterinary medicine. Following a dream that had survived everything else, Graham insisted on hosting a graduation party at his penthouse. He'd opened his home to them more and more over the months, until it no longer felt like just his space, but something shared, something communal. The party was small but perfect. Nora's co-workers from the nursing home came, bringing cards and small gifts. A few of Jessie's teachers attended, marveling at how resilient she'd been through such difficult circumstances. Graham's business partner and his wife came, curious about the woman and teenager who'd somehow brought their reclusive friend back to life. Graham gave a toast that made everyone cry. "Jessie, I've known you for less than a year. You've taught me more about courage and strength than I learned in 52 years before we met. You faced the possibility of losing your mother with grace and determination. You never gave up hope. You never stopped fighting. And you did all of that while maintaining perfect grades and being accepted to college." He paused, emotion thick in his voice. "I had a daughter once. She'd be about your age now if she'd lived. I think you two would have been friends. I think she'd have admired you as much as I do. So on behalf of the family I lost and the family I've found, congratulations. The world is lucky to have you in it." Jessie wiped tears from her eyes and hugged Graham fiercely. "Thank you for everything. For Mom, for me, for giving us a chance when we had nothing." "You've given me more than I gave you," Graham replied. "You gave me a reason to care again." Nora's confession later that evening. After the guests had left and Jessie had gone to bed in the guest room, she'd started calling my room at Graham's place. Nora and Graham sat on his balcony, watching the city lights twinkle below. They'd been dancing around their feelings for months. It's acknowledging them but not acting on them. Nora had needed to focus on treatment and recovery. Graham had needed to be patient, to let her heal physically and emotionally. But the tension between them had been building, electric and undeniable. "Can I tell you something?" Nora asked, breaking the comfortable silence. "Always." "I'm terrified," she admitted. "Not of the cancer coming back, though that scares me too. I'm terrified of this. Of how much I've come to depend on you." Graham turned to face her fully. "Why does that terrify you?" "Because I've already lost one person I loved. David's death almost destroyed me. If I let myself fall completely for you and something happens, I don't think I'd survive it." "I'm terrified too," Graham confessed. "I lost Catherine and Emma, and it did destroy me. I stopped living for 5 years. The thought of opening my heart again, of risking that kind of pain, makes me want to run away and hide. So what do we do?" Nora asked. Graham took her hand, marveling at how natural the gesture felt now. "I think we acknowledge that life is uncertain, that loving someone always involves risk, that we could play it safe and protect our hearts, but we'd be missing out on something extraordinary." He moved closer, his voice dropping to barely above a whisper. "Catherine taught me that love is worth the risk. Emma taught me that joy exists in simple moments,